For the stop sign animation, we're going to use After Effects to do a little page curl animation. So I've prepared a blank stop sign, the stop text, and then some go text that we're going to put underneath this stop text. So I'm going to grab these, pull them all in. And we'll use this as the base, so we'll just pull that into the composition. And that creates this new composition here. We'll also grab the type and drop it on top. And then we can grab the type go and drop that underneath that type layer. And now we want to position this so the O's are in the same spot. So I can grab this dot here and resize, and then hold Shift to make sure it stays aspect ratio correct. And then I'll just nudge it by holding Shift and hitting the arrow keys to move it in larger increments. And then releasing Shift to do smaller increments. That looks pretty spot on. Now I'll hide the go for now, and we'll just focus on this. So in order for these pieces to peel off, we'll use the page turn effect. And I'm using this plugin called Console in After Effects. So if you see that pop up, I'm hitting Control Space to bring up this. Otherwise, you can go over to Effects and Presets and type in Page Turn, and then just drag that on the layer. And we'll be peeling from the top left corner. And you can see the point here. I accidentally added that to the Go layer, so I'll just copy that, paste it on the type layer, and then delete this one on the Go layer. And because I copy pasted from this layer, it looks like the back page was set to this other layer. So I need to switch that to layer 1. And now if I grab this little dot here, you can see it just peels this really nicely off. And you can see I'm on the left here because we're going from the top left corner. So if I drag in this direction, you can see it pulls diagonally. But if we go straight down this edge, it'll go straight up and down. So all we need to do to make this peel is just animate this one point, this fold position. So we'll start it right before it takes effect. And then move forward in time. And we want this to be quite short. So I'll hit Control K to bring up the composition settings. And we'll change the duration from 2 minutes to maybe 2 seconds. And I can hit U to show any of the keyframes made here. So I'll just go forward a few frames, let's say 10 frames. And with this layer selected and the effect selected, I can grab this point again and drag it all the way down. And that automatically makes a keyframe here, since we set this to be keyable by keying it earlier. So now if I scrub here, you can see the whole thing animates off. And this looks very artificial. Nothing would be that perfectly peeling off. So what we can do is use masks to offset these. So up here, I'll grab a rectangular tool, and this will make a mask because we have this selected. So I can click and drag over the S, and then I'll hit Control D to duplicate this layer, hit V to go to selection mode, double click the mask, and just drag this over to the T, duplicate it again with Control D, and I'll make sure it's selected down here. Duplicate that layer, double click, slide this over, select here again, duplicate, double click, and move. So now we have our S. I'm hitting Enter to rename these. T, O, P. And by separating these, with them all selected, I'll hit U to reveal those keyframes again. And now I can offset these just a little bit so they're not all together at once. And you can see everything's getting duplicated And that's because this page turn is using the entire layer and not taking into account our mask here. So we need to change this back page to effects and masks. And that should remove all the overlap. And because we duplicated these, we also need to change the back page layer for each of these. So S is S, T is T, O is O, and P is P. So now you can see all of these are peeling off nicely. We have a little errant slice here. And that is probably from the T grabbing a little bit too much. We can toggle the visibility to check that. So we just need to grab this mask and just scoot it in a little bit. Now those are peeling off nicely. And I can set the zoom here to fit up to 100% because I'm working in a pretty small 1920 by 1080 screen for this recording. So that way, as I move this, it'll stay in there. So we have this peeling off nicely, but when these reach the end, they're just going to clip out because there's nothing behind this or underneath this. So let's fade this out with a little bit of a noise gradient. So hitting Control Y makes a solid, and we can make this pure white. Now let's add turbulent noise. That just gives us a little rough noise to work with. In addition to that, let's add a gradient ramp. And that overrides the turbulent noise, but if we drag this and put it above the noise, this will be calculated first. And on a turbulent noise, we can switch this over to multiply. That way it's multiplying on top of this ramp. And then we can adjust these values because we only want to affect this very bottom when they leave the frame, when the stop letters leave. And we're going to use the black and white values as alpha values, so we want this to be white and this to be black down here. So let's alternate these. And we need this to be white, so we might need to screen this instead of multiply. So now you can see the alpha will be pure white here, which will make them visible, and then they'll kind of roughly disappear down here. And we want this very bottom edge to be totally black, so we need to adjust this a little bit more. So instead of using screen, let's try overlay. And that way that black edge remains. So without the turbulent noise, you can see we have this very simple gradient, and then this noise just roughens that up. Now to collapse these layers, I'll deselect any layer and hit U. That'll collapse those up. And I want to set the matte for each of these from this white solid. So I can actually drag this down, and I believe I can hide it as well just to get it out of the way. And now we'll select each of these, add a set matte, and then we'll select that final layer. And we should rename it as well. Gradient matte. And we're working with the P at first, so let's just scrub so we can see what's going on. And we're not going to use the alpha channel, we want luminance here. And we also need to make sure we're using effects and masks. And now you can see the P here is starting to disappear as it leaves the frame. That way, this very edge here, we'll never see any of this P, and we'll not see the clipping there. So I can just copy this and then paste it on each of these layers. So now the pieces fade off right when they leave, and there's just a little bit of roughness, just so it's not so perfect. And if we wanted more roughness, we could go to this gradient, go to the turbulent noise, and increase this contrast, just to make it look a little bit more textured. But because the noise isn't moving and these are sliding underneath it, it might look a little strange to have too much noise. So I'll keep this at 100. So now the pieces are falling off, but we don't have anything left over. So let's turn on this go again. And as you can see, the go text is pure white, and the stop is actually gray with this little honeycomb texture. So we need to do a little work to make this match better. So I'll start by adding a fill. And we can grab maybe this darker gray in the middle of the honeycomb. That gets overall luminance, right? But we still want to get a little bit of texture in there. And we could extract a little piece here, bring it into Photoshop or something and make it tileable, and then use that as a texture. Or if we just want to get close enough, we can add a grid to this. And we want this grid to be the light lines, so we'll screen it. And the anchor and the corner point determine the size of the grid. So the anchor point is here, or the anchor point's here and the corner's here. So you can see as we adjust this, it changes the size of the grid. So we need to bring it down until we're basically just as big as one of these little holes. And this border is too thick, so we need to make this smaller. And I'm hitting the down arrow key just to go by increments of 1. Looks like that border thickness is good. And looks like that might be about the size of it. I know it's not perfect, but it'll look good enough from a distance. And it doesn't look like we can rotate this grid in this setup, but for now I think I'm just going to call it good enough. If you wanted, you could just grab this texture and use that in here, but we'll just keep with this grid for now. Because from a distance it looks pretty similar. So now we have these pieces peeling off. We just need to figure out how to make this go invisible at first and then animate on as it peels. And because the O is the same, let's actually hide that. Because we want the O to stay in the same spot and the go to kind of fill it in. So let's just use a couple masks to reveal this go. I'll hide these other layers for now, and we can delete this O. Now back up at the rectangle tool, we can drag over each of these letters just to give each of them their own mask. And I'll label these masks. We have G, O, and the exclamation mark. Well, I should have kept that O up here, actually, so let me undo. Get that O back. And on the stop sign, I'll just make these masks again. And rename these. And this O, we're never going to use this O, so we can subtract that. And now, we'll be able to just animate these masks on just as the other pieces peel off. So let's unhide these. And for the G, we'll slide that up. This will be the starting position. Same with the exclamation mark. So now those are fully hidden and the O is still subtracted. So for this G, let's twirl this down, and we want to animate this mask path. So we'll click this little stopwatch, and then scrub forward a few, and then double click, and then we can just drag this down. And we'll do the same with this other mask. And we don't want this O to peel, so we can just delete that page turn and the set matte, because we'll be holding on to that. And hitting spacebar, I can see it happens really quickly. A little too quickly for us to register what's going on. So I'm going to make this bigger, hit U to show all the keyframes, select all of them, and then hold Option or Alt, and then drag out. And that will stretch everything kind of proportionately. Now the speed's looking good, but we're hitting 40 frames, which for a ping sequence is going to be a little bit too much, so let's be a little bit more conservative. I think around 25 might be enough. Now I just need to adjust the timing of these masks. I'll hit U to reveal those. And just tweak these keyframes just so they match up a little bit more closely. And to make this transition smoother, we can add a little bit of feathering to this mask. So with this layer selected, hit F, and you'll reveal the mask feathers. And then I'll just select both of these and crank these up. And now you can see here it's getting a little softer. And same with this one. So it almost looks like these were just behind these other pieces all along. And now that we know how long we're going to make this, we can drag this work area down just so it fills this, and then we can right click and trim comp to work area. That way it just cleans this up. And if I hit Control K again, I can see the frame rate is at 45.3, which is from a previous project. So that's much too fast. Spark usually operates in 30. So I'll just set it to that. And in Spark, we can actually decrease the frame rate so we can have this last a little bit longer. And I'll set this to 30 frames. So now I'll select all these, drag these layers out so they reach the end of the composition. And we'll see if the timing of that is any different. It's pretty quick, so I'll just grab these, drag them out a little bit. And when you change frame rates, the keys might not automatically lock onto the frame. You can see this key here is between these two frames, which is not ideal. So I'm just going to go and kind of check to make sure these are all in place. And I think a quick way to do that is if you select all of them and just move them forward one and then back one. Okay, that didn't work. I thought that used to work, but it's fine. We don't have too many keys. And that looks pretty smooth. It's a basic animation, but it could look really fun in Spark. So now we need to export this out. Hitting Control M, I'll bring up the export box. And because I prefer exporting out of Adobe Media Encoder, I'll queue that up here. And we'll choose ping sequence. And make sure it's ping sequence with alpha. Then hit the green arrow to render. And it looks like that did a fine job. Unfortunately, we're looking at 40 megabytes of images, so we need to do some compression here. I'll open up Crushy. Drag all these in. And let's reduce this to 512 by 512. And then we'll keep it as a ping. And let's see what it looks like with a quality level all the way at 1. Doesn't look too bad. We get a little crunchiness up here. But I think we can work with that. And I'll save to folder just to make sure we don't overwrite our original files. Now we're sitting at 1.95 megabytes, which is still quite a lot for a ping sequence, or for any sort of texture in Spark. So let's see if we can delete a few of these last frames that might just be the same. It looks like at frame 24, everything is totally off. And 23, you can see a little bit. So we'll keep 24, but delete everything after 24. Now we're at 1.64. I'll call that good enough. We can close Crushy and everything else. Now back in Spark, we just need to import that ping sequence. So we'll go to Add Asset and make another material. Call this mat stop sign anim. And then in texture, we'll add an animation sequence. And we'll call this anim stop sign. And now we need to choose our files. And make sure to check no compression since we already did that ourselves. So on the plane here, let's change the material to this new stop sign anim material. And you can see it's already looping indefinitely. So that's a good sign, it's working. Now you can see it's clipping, and that's probably fine because we won't see this in the scene. But I still like to add on that alpha test just so it clears that out. Now with the plane selected, let's scale it up. And it should match exactly the size of this reference image. If anything, it might be good to have it a little bit larger. And I think we want it to be totally flush, so let's just change this Z value back to 0. And it is a bit flickery, so let's just pull it forward just a hair. Just so we don't get that flicker. And in the 2D view, I can see it's still a little bit too small. That looks good. And obviously, we don't want it to loop forever. So let's open up our patch editor. So right now, we have this animation looping indefinitely. As you can see here, the loop is checked. If we hit randomize, well, that doesn't seem to do anything. So we need to tell it what frame we want it to play. So we're not going to rely on this for playback. We're going to do it ourselves. So I'll check the current frame to make this patch. And now you can see as I toggle up, it plays forward and backwards. So we want it to function as soon as this is found. So we need to have an animation that goes up 25 frames. So we need a few patches here. We'll start with an animation patch. And that automatically makes this pulse. So when this Boolean goes from false to true, it will send a pulse when it's turned on into the play of the animation. And we have 25 frames of animation, and Spark, I believe, runs around 30 frames per second generally. And so the duration of 1 might be just right. But this output is going to go from 0 to 1, and our frames go from 0 to either 24 or 25 if this is base 0. And our animation is 1 to 25, so we obviously need more value. So we can take this progress and use a frame transition. So that converts this 0 to 1 value into frames. So if we select this, we can see we do have 25 frames. And the first frame appears to be 1, so we'll just try 1 to start. And then we should be able to connect this directly here. So as soon as this is found, it'll start this animation. It will go for 1 second, and it will go from 1 to 25. So it almost worked, but it looped back around to stop. So let's try changing this first frame to 0. And the total frames is still 25. So let's restart that. Now it looks like it's working. So as soon as it sees the reference image, it'll play this animation. Now I'll test it on my phone just to make sure it's working. So that did work, but it happened so quickly. So let's add a little delay in here. Let's just do 1 second. So that way, as soon as the virtual stop sign appears, we'll have 1 second before it starts the animation. I'm also going to make this animation a little bit longer just by increasing this duration in the animation patch. Now I'll test it and see how it looks. Now it could definitely be a little bit bigger, but this will do.